Hey, welcome to the show today. Today we're going to be talking to Al Lewin. He is a great hydrofoiling specialist. He's been around for years and years and years. And if you do not know how to hydrofoil or you are great at it, we're going to go through super exciting tips that are going to kind of get you moving in the right direction and trying to achieve your goals. So how we doing today, Al?
Great. How are you doing, Trevor?
And doing good, doing real good. I've been doing this for I don't know. I'm only 4 years in. I know you've been doing this forever. So what's the timeline? When did you start doing all this?
When they started making these. So first time I saw an air chair was in 1991 in the back of a water ski magazine. I went to a ski school later that summer and they actually had one there, and we tried it out after lessons, hot dog slalom skiing, and realized I could do this on the little lake we had on the little 90 horsepower outboard. That was 31 years ago, and I'm still riding and having fun.
It's one of the craziest things you'll ever see, I swear. When you walk or when you're riding around on the lake, when you see someone pass by, if you've never seen that, jaws are on the floor, boats are chasing you down the lake trying to see what you're doing, and then when you do some tricks like you can do, I could imagine the people and the jaws that you've seen drop over the years.
Yeah, it's been fun, and let's be honest. I mean, the showing off part is it's what we all do it for, right?
Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
good time. If we weren't having a good time, we wouldn't be doing this.
Absolutely. What is your go-to trick? I mean, mine. I'm a little bit way more basic than you, but I'm ripping out there. I'm throwing a big gainer as close as I can get to the boat without making anybody, freak out or anything. So what do you do when you've got the audience is there?
So the gainers are fun, and a tip for you is start looking back at them, because that's a good way you can actually see the jaws drop when you're upside down. Just make eye contact with them in the gainer.
The
But
problem is that when I get that high, I'm terrified. So
well,
I don't, I'll have to work on that. But I'm just terrified the whole time I'm upside down.
practice, practice, practice.
Do you do the
So
point? Are you a pointer?
no, I'll leave that one to Fernie. Fernie's got the signature. Fernie and Tori have the signature front flip point. So with the
Yeah.
gainer, it's more just kind of look back and direct eye contact the whole
Okay.
time.
Okay.
So,
What were you saying? Your trick, your go-to is what?
so the go-to would be, either a big front flip, because that's an easy one just to kind of lay out and, eye contact the whole way through the trick, and that one always gets a good rise, and I can put up a pretty good front flip in just about any water. The other one that's always fun is, to bust out the KGB. So that's one that, I think I've got a pretty good handle on that trick, and that's always a crowd pleaser.
I tell you, it's kind of funny that when you get to meet guys that you've been stalking on the internet, like I've done for years, watching all your training. I mean, it's actually pathetic. This day and age with the internet, you get to like really fanboy it up. Yeah, I can see all your tricks and stuff online, so it's kind of crazy to see that handle pass. I'm not really sure that I could keep my thoughts focused to even do that. I don't even know how you begin doing a handle pass. When was the first time you ever did a KGB?
Uh, phew, uh, Probably about 2010.
Okay.
Brazos River skiing with, actually, it was probably before then, because I was back skiing with Todd Kaiser for about 4 or 5 years. We had a good group of guys here in Texas, and we'd ski between Austin, Dallas, and Tyler just about every weekend. So at that time, it was me, Todd Kaiser, Jim Serber, who are all, very good riders. So we just kept pushing each other and learning. Then the community started growing here in Austin. So we had, for a long while, about 5 riders, and we would be out 2, 3 times a week. So between me, Matt Van Gilder, Clint McCree, Benton Travis, we all really progressed then. And I think that's where I really started getting the KGB dialed. But that trick took me somewhere about 8 months to start getting them consistent, and
Now, did
probably 2 dozen handles.
did someone actually do it before you, or was everyone just trying to learn this on the fly?
So first person who learned that trick or landed that trick and named it was Andrew Pilkington, who's also a phenomenal rider. So he's always a fun guy to watch ride too. Just rides with a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of power. He landed it. Todd Kaiser was the second one to land it. I believe I was the third one to land that trick.
It's pretty crazy. I mean, when you get to the peak of almost a back roll setting, and then all of a sudden a handle pass, kind of, I don't know. It's an intense trick.
Well, and that's where, I mean, if we dissect it, that's everyone's misconception, and that's why a lot of people will go out and say, oh, I can do a big back roll, I can get a KGB. But whenever you really break that trick down, the first thing that you realize, and the first thing I coach people, is the takeoff is different than a back roll. If it feels like a back roll, it's wrong. And you can get close doing that, but trust me from experience, You get a lot of slack in the rope, and you will cut a dozen handles learning that trick if you throw it that way.
Well, I want to get into some of these more advanced level tricks, but the reason why we're here today, I really wanted to kind of break down some major pieces to this whole thing to help people excel. I don't really, as much as I'm excited to talk to you, like let's get down to the nuts and bolts. And when you work with someone that is very inexperienced, let's get past the get up point. Let's get past those kinds of things. What is kind of that go-to coaching aspect that is very important to kind of teach someone that has aspirations for an invert, wants to do some of these upper level tricks? What is that to you?
Well, and I'm really looking forward to getting into this, and I'm really thankful for this opportunity to talk with you and kind of put some information together, because these are questions that I get quite a bit. Or I'll get questions, at a higher level of like, hey, I want to do a back roll. What do I do? And I see the video and I go, first thing we're going to do is take a step back and work on your line control, because what it fundamentally comes down to is line control. So that would be the first thing that I talk to people about. A lot of times you'll see people, and they go to jump, or if they're riding, they've got the alligator arms in here.
Sure.
Thing that happens when you load that line is your arms come out, then the rope snaps back, and then you've got, varying line tension. So leaving those arms out, learning to jump, learning how to load the line is, step number one.
It's kind of actually more complicated than that may sound. If you're like fresh to this, you hear this and you're like, oh yeah, straight arms. But what I've found over progressing over the last 2 or 3 years is you think you know what you're talking about. You think you got it. And then all of a sudden you want to go a little bit bigger, and then you find out, oh, my arms were not that straight. Oh, I'm not holding the load how it should as I cut from side to side. It's just kind of interesting, because I think that listeners should probably realize that even what you're saying as far as this is concerned, I would think that what you mean by that is all actually a little bit more complicated. As you start, loading the line, there's different levels to that, right?
Oh, it's quite a bit more complicated. So what I would say is, if you're new to the sport, welcome to your new addiction. Trust me from experience, it's a
cheap.
Lifetime thing.
It's cheap. You're gonna like save a lot of money here. It's cheap.
Yeah, you'll make the best friends you'll ever meet doing this sport. So yeah, welcome. But learn to ride with your arms out first and foremost. I mean, before you even start jumping, I mean, if you're comfortable with your arms out, and obviously, if you hit rollers, things like that, don't be afraid to kind of absorb. But as you're moving, your arms should be extended, because in any water sport, your arms are an extension of the rope. The rope doesn't bend, your arms don't bend either.
Well, one of the biggest things that I've felt, and you could probably explain this in more detail, but the idea that you take the waves, you take the boat, it's really easy to use it in your arms, right? You use the lever to maintain your balance in that up and down motion. It's very easy to use your arms, but as you kind of move forward, maybe you've got some different tactics, but what I've noticed is it's way more in your back. If you allow your back to take that load with the line, all of a sudden you're able to keep straight arms. Does that make sense?
Sure. And so, I mean, and it's two different areas. So if you're just kind of cruising and following the boat, it's one thing, because at that point you're really going to feel it this way. Now, if you're cutting and the line's loaded, then arms are out, arms are out, arms are out. Yeah. And that's where, because I mean, having that line loaded and having your arms out, you're going to plow through the wakes and not change altitude.
Do you have any types of drills or things that you kind of walk some people through? I know on our lake, I learned from, there's probably 5 or 6 riders, Josh and Chris Hauk, and Kevin and Carmen. A lot of these guys, they're all riding and they're involved in the community quite a bit. But one thing they've always had me do was you're doing huge pendulum cuts as fast as you can, back and forth, learning like, oh, the cut's over here a little bit farther out than what you're doing. Can you keep your arms straight all the way from left to right? Do you have any types of drills or things that riders should be trying out if they're struggling to keep their arms straight?
Yeah, especially because usually the first invert is a gainer. So the first thing to get, before you can get a gainer, is you have to get a good air jump. So learning where, how hard to cut, how hard to go out, and the timing there is, one of the first things that I kind of teach it. And that tailors into the arms out as well. Because if your arms are in, I mean, you're going to be kind of cheating and you're going to pull yourself out wider. And then that causes you to square up abruptly. So you get kind of, a dip in the line all of a sudden. If you learn, the harder I cut, the wider I go, let the boat pull you parallel without trying to move your arms. That's where you start to feel, that pendulum like you were talking about. And that's key to getting the timing and the line load, at takeoff.
Do you find yourself doing the same tricks? I shouldn't say same tricks, but do you find that the line load matches like the exact position of the, if you want to do a gainer, it's kind of within like a 5 to 10 foot range. It's kind of a small little area at which you get maximal pop, maximal everything you're going for. Do you think that that's something that people should focus on more of, rather than, hey, you're going to go do an air jump in the same spot every single time and load the line right? Is that something you talk about any?
Um, Thinking on that one for a second, because that varies quite a bit, right? Because if depending on your boat speed, depending on your comfort level, depending on your riding style, you're going to cut harder or softer. So what I try and get people to do is really focus on keeping their arms out and back off their cut when they're learning something. So for consistency, obviously throwing in the same place, same line load, same takeoff is great, because you're gonna you get more comfortable, and then once you get more comfortable in the takeoff, you can let your mind go to more of the details on the trick.
Okay, so more or less, your focus is strictly line. If you're a newbie, come off your cut a little bit. You say that, and I immediately think of all the disastrous inverts I've seen happen coming off your line. So maybe explain in better detail, I guess. Let's say that you're learning your first invert or even your air jump out to the side. What is it about the approach when you're about to take off? When you say come off the line, that could mean different things to different people. When you come off the line, I've seen many times people square their board up and they're basically running even with the boat. And as soon as they load the line, they've got no rope. So where is the sweet spot? Is it direction of board at all? Is there what more specifically could you give someone that really doesn't understand come off their cut? Like, what does that mean?
Sure. So if you watch somebody learning to gain or even learning an air jump, like you talked about, a lot of times what you see is somebody takes a very aggressive cut out from the wake and then abruptly kind of squares up with the boat.
Right.
So when you do that, you get slack in the line. Now, the proper approach that I teach people is you start from just outside the wake, and then you make a gradual cut out. And I mean, the rope's only so long, so you can't keep going away from the boat forever. So depending on how hard you cut, at some point, the force of the boat is going to pull you back parallel with the boat. That's your cue to jump. So if you wait beyond that point, you're going to have to start leaning away from the boat, and you're going to start putting more angle and more tension on your takeoff, which does some weird things. So cut out, and again, the harder you cut, the wider you're going to go because you've got more force. But as soon as that boat pulls you parallel, you'll feel the line start to kind of let up. Before that happens, I mean, as soon as that line starts to go away, that's your cue to dip and go. And that's true for a big air jump. That's true for a gainer. Now,
so what about when you're seeing guys go a little shallow, in the 45s of the boat with max line load? You see a lot of takeoffs in that position, whether it be for a glide, whether it be for a big roll. So how do all these things blend with that? Is that universal for just a certain amount of tricks, or are you kind of suggesting at the base level that's kind of what you're suggesting?
So for certain tricks, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, for glides, rolls, KGBs, even, you want to take off on edge, because what you need for those tricks is you want that line load to kind of set the direction of the trick. So those you do take off on more edge than you do for something like a gainer or for an air jump. An exception to that is, I mean, watch Kevin Thayer ride. I mean, that guy takes off, he's still on a 45 cut when he launches. Now, that's another thing that we'll talk about, line control, is, how you kind of manage that and not get swung in like crazy on that. But, Kevin is kind of an exception there, and he throws huge, crazy big air jumps and air fronts as well. But for the most part, I mean, it's especially for gainers, first inverts, learning how to get a good pop on the line is you cut out wide when the boat pulls you parallel. That's your cue to dip and go. And you don't hesitate, because if you hesitate, you get slack, you're starting to lose speed, and that just takes air out of the trick.
So let's say, you've got your line tension when you're cutting, right? Any average rider probably is going to find that pretty quick, right? We go out, we slalom, you're understanding how to do that. To set up someone's ski, I find that there are so many variables with it. Do you have any suggestions of level rider meets distance of rope meets the type of shim and how it sets your body on the ski? I mean, I've messed around personally. I can't even ride a hot ski. For some people, they really like to lay forward. My back does not like that. I've found that I can jump with my legs an awful lot more. I know you kind of ride a little bit more forward in some of your older videos for sure. I mean, you are laying on your knees basically the whole time. I could not do that. There's no way that my back can do that. Is there any, let's take it step by step. So if you're new to the sport and you wanted someone to work on line load, okay, and you wanted them to start learning to cut, what kind of setup should they be trying to get their ski to be like? Does that make sense? Where should they be back position? If you're going arm straight, do you want them in a forward position so they need more shim? Do you want them to sit upright? How long should the rope be? How fast should they be going on the boat?
Sure. And me personally, I usually have people ride somewhere between, 70 foot to 85 foot, seems to be where most people are comfortable on a rope. Yeah. So that's a good place to start. If you want to mess around with, shorter ropes, slower boat speeds, that's something. But again, that's where you start getting more of these dynamics. I mean, it's more of an aggressive line load. So 70 to 85 tends to be a good sweet spot there. And as far as lift on a ski, I wouldn't say, I mean, an easy thing to check is if you cut out wide and you're waiting out there, because like before you come in for a wake jump or even just a double wake cut, as you're floating out wide, if you're having to lean over and, kiss the nose of your board to keep the ski in the water, you may want to take a little lift out of it. Now, exceptions being like as you advance, I mean, so the way my ski rides, and to your point, in earlier videos of me, ski was always way forward, but now seat towers are raked forward about an inch or 2 inches, and that gives you a little bit more leverage over there. So I can ride in a more neutral position now, but still get that explosive quick takeoff that I like. So that's one thing that kind of helps. So I would say sitting a bit more upright, an easy gauge again is, if you go out wide and you're having to really lean over your ski to try and keep it in the water, try taking a little bit of lift out for now.
And then that is just for anybody that doesn't know, you can buy shim kits, so they come with newer skis now. What exactly, so let me ask you, this will be a more advanced question. So if you're going out and you're doing one of your big flips, right? When you turn the corner, is there any moment at which you're not holding the ski down? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
so as soon as the line load comes in, so the way that my ski is set right now, I mean, my wife rides my ski comfortably the way that it's shimmed right now. So it's not crazy hot. Now there's some people I've been on Jake Bradley's ski and also the Nairns, like it's very hard for me to kind of keep those skis down, but that's kind of, a different technique, that, some people refer to as the dark side technique, where you're riding with foot pressure, and that foot pressure kind of holds the ski down. So as soon as you let off on that, I mean, the ski's really wanting to come up, which is, great, works for a lot of people. My style is more, I ride with a short wheelbase and I use a lot of, pull on my knees to get the ski to come up quick.
interesting. It's super cool because it's kind of one of those things that I feel like there's so many variables to find like your sweet spot. One thing that I've kind of told some people that I ride with, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've always found is if you cut out super wide and you come off your cut, if it's trying to come out of the water, I'm always like, I got to take this thing down a little bit. Is that general rule of thumb? Is that pretty sound to say?
Yeah. And that's kind of a good gauge for, I mean, is your ski too hot for you? And again, as you progress, as you're moving more, then you can you can play around with putting more lift in there, because you're going to be more comfortable, understand when to kind of get on top of the ski and how not to really overshoot the line and get slack in there, which is going to cause it to rise. So
Okay.
to loop back to your other question, because I did get a little distracted there. Whenever I cut out wide, the ski's gliding, I'm over the front of the ski. Now, as soon as I start loading that line back up, that line load brings that nose back down level. And at that point, I'm already starting to move my shoulders back. And that also lets you get back behind the ski a little quicker.
So is there any point at which a hotter ski is a benefit?
Big air contest, or if it matches your style. I mean, some people, really like to ride with a hot ski and foot pressure. I mean, there's a lot of good riders out there that ride that technique. But for me, I've just, older videos, I would tend to lean forward more than I would use foot pressure.
Right. And what is there any indication at which you should make your ski hotter? What would that be?
If you do a double weight cut and you feel the ski diving on you as you gain speed, then I would say put a little bit of shim in there. And an easy way to do that, that I found, the things like, the extreme shim kit or the gurgler shim kit is great because they come in 1/4 degree increments. So you can go up just a tiny bit. If you want to do it on the cheap, then what you can do is use nickel, dimes, pennies, and even better, if you have one of those souvenir pennies that get squished, those make a great just small tweak shim.
Nice, nice. I like that.
So put it in the back to take lift out, put it in the front to add lift in it. So
So
what
if
you're
you got,
doing
if
is
you're on,
kind of
go
changing the
ahead.
rake angle on that rear wing. So if that rear wing is angled down a bit more, it's going to pull the front of the ski up. So that's why putting that shim in the front of the rear wing will actually give it more lift.
Do you ever use more negative shim if you're teaching a new person to get up? You know what I mean? Make it,
Absolutely.
yeah. So just kill the lift and just get them out of the water. It's a good principle there.
Yeah, and if they're really struggling, then what you do is you just take a small piece of rope and tie it around the foil, and that just down at the base of the foil, like I usually loop it around the T-bar and around the in front of the rear wing, and that just gives it enough leverage to really pivot that thing down on the water.
And then it won't lift at all. I've never tried it to know.
It barely. I mean, you really have to fight it to get it to lift that way. But that's an easy way to kind of get if somebody's struggling to get out of the water or struggling to keep the ski on the water. That's an easy technique to try as well.
Well, let's get into some meat and potatoes here. We got the, best skier ever on the mic. Let's talk about it. Let's see if you. I know that there's a couple transition points. It's fresh in my mind that is always kind of difficult to approach your first invert. So let's kind of go through first invert and then transition into that mean old wake. Just seems like once you're doing all these air rolls and doing things out to the side, that wake is just terrifying. So kind of like, can we walk through the process of, you've got a newish rider that's ready to flip, they're pretty good at running back and forth, they've got some line load, how do you not die? You know what I mean? Like, how do you go out there and you get upside down for the first time? When you start landing a couple, when do you go to the wake? How do you get there?
Sure. So, and what I would say before you go out for your first invert, and I know everybody, I mean, I'm guilty, we all are. Like, as soon as you can jump the thing, it's like, all right, I'm going to flip it.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen other people flip. I can do this.
So do that. Sure. Be safe, wear a helmet, make sure you've got, buddy on the pin, make sure check your equipment, before you go out and do anything, especially if you're going to start working on inverts. And another safety point there, a lot of the older skis that you may find, if you're new getting into the sport, just have rubber heel straps. Don't trust those things, especially on an invert. It's easy to get pulled out of those, and you'll end up getting pulled back through the tower, and you can hit your heels on things, and then you're worried about where the foil is too. So cinch foot straps, Malibu mark bindings, or
some of the Pier ones.
The Pier ones, those are the other ones. So yeah, those are three good choices there for rigid retention heel.
And you kind of blew through that a little bit. We should also say, what do you got? Bullet releases you could use, the cinch strap. What other mechanisms are you using for releases?
So bullet release is a great one. It's actually made by a friend of mine, Benton. And that one is nice because it goes on any rope, goes on any boat. So you can take that with you. And what it is it's just a shear pin. So if you get caught in the rope, the pin breaks, lets the line out. A Cinch Max is another good one. It's a Velcro based product. They've been around forever. We've all used them. And the high end of that is a Comtech release, which actually has a manual release as well as an automatic pressure set release. So if you're really into it, that's the Cadillac of the release.
Yeah, we've got all those things out on the lake, and it's kind of funny. You don't think you need it until you need it, and then when it pops, you're like, "Yeah, that was about to be really bad." That was about to be bad. Have you ever seen? Well, what's the craziest thing you've ever seen where you needed a release and maybe someone didn't have it?
Mark Lee, Master Lee, at his Nationals in Denver, and we went out to ride, and this first thing I noticed, like, oh man. Master Lee, you don't ride with the release on your ropes? Like, no, I never get tangled in the rope. And first trick he threw, he wrapped up in the rope. And there's a great picture of it. And I think he was throwing a 3, and there's probably 2 wraps on his foil. Fortunately, it was on his foil. And whenever he hit, I mean, it was bound up enough on his foil that actually snapped off the tower before any damage happened to anything. So.
Oh, nice. That's lucky. I mean, I've seen some different posts and things where guys have got their arm wrapped up in a handle, or, I've been guilty of a couple wing yanks before just trying to learn offside stuff. But I couldn't imagine seeing that rope spun around your T-bar. That doesn't sound like any fun.
No, it's not. Yeah, and learning tricks along the way. I mean, especially anytime you're working on spin tricks, 360s. Anything like that where you have a high probability of spinning in the rope, I highly suggest you have a manual release and a competent pinner.
What is it exactly about the spin? I mean, I guess it's common sense you're spinning, but is there more slack in the rope, or why has it become so much more dangerous? I kind of, you know what I mean? You thinking through it, it's
Well, with the 360, the tendency for most people when they first throw it is, the proper way to throw it. Let me start with that. Just so the first thing you hear is the right way to do it. I mean, is you learn the jump drift, which comes back to this whole topic of line tension and what to do with your arms. And once you do the jump drift, all you have to do is pull and pass. And what that does is it keeps your shoulders level. The way most people want to throw it when they first go for it is they want to throw it with their shoulders. And when you do that, the tendency is to pitch off axis. And when you do, you end up pushing the foil up into the rope.
oh.
So
So
that's why,
when you're not doing it quite well enough, you're actually not on access is the issue. I got you.
right. And if you push on your feet, which a lot of people, including myself, have a tendency to do on 360s, then it's real easy to push yourself right into the rope. Other tricks like KGB, if you throw that wrong, you get a lot of slack in the line. And when you land, you actually scoop forward and can catch the rope.
Nice. Well, not nice. Sounds terrifying. I mean, there's nothing worse than a line loaded something in the flats or even that stuff right over the wake when you're super high and you know that I mean, there's nothing you can do. You're on it.
Yeah, well, the caveat to that is, when you forget to turn the release back up and you go throw a big laid out front and realize it was set too low. So all of a sudden you're seeing this rope coming at you midair and there's nothing you can do either.
Well, I have to say one more thing about the release, then we'll get back where we were for anyone that's trying to learn those things. I would highly suggest, and this is probably common knowledge that people do, but I never did it. You got to shake that thing back and forth in a bullet release and make sure that it works right before you ride every single time. I was doing learning a bunch of front flips, beating myself up. Kind of my neck was not doing so hot, so I was like, I'll probably lay off these for a minute. I went to do a front roll, that pin broke, and it was just a simple old front roll. I didn't do anything crazy at all. Ended up upside down, it kind of jacked me up for a long time. But what I didn't notice was it was bent, and probably 2 months later, I was literally just riding around, and I never even loaded the line because I wasn't doing anything in the air. My neck was pretty jacked up last year, and the pin was bent again. It wouldn't slide through at all. And I would imagine it was compromised. So if I would have done something crazy, I probably would have had the same result.
Yeah, and for that, I mean, I would check, manufacturer's website, bulletrelease.com, and there are instructions in there.
You got to read the instructions? Come on, Al. Come on.
Sorry, man, I'm an engineer. We write the instructions. So, and the idea is you go out and you find which pin works for you. Because, I mean, you're a big guy. You're not going to put, an 8-year-old on the same, bullet release pin that you're
Sure,
riding.
good point.
So find the one that works for you that you're not going to fatigue right away, because you don't want that to fatigue under normal riding. But I mean, as with anything, I mean, I've got, an attic full of boards that aren't supposed to fatigue either, but everything's got its limits.
Yeah, sure,
So,
sure.
obviously check the pin, but step one, find the right pin for you. So for you, I'd probably say you're going with a heavy pin because
Yeah, it was actually a black pin. It was a black pin. Yeah.
So you're just really yanking on that thing.
I guess
Maybe
apparently
we should be talking about arms out for you so that you're not just getting that big snap load on there.
Bingo. That was last year. I wasn't quite really good at that at the time, but anyway, so let's get back on. So your first invert, what are you doing when you approach for a first invert? You've never done one before. Let's say you're ready for it. You've got the line loaded. You've done some air jumps. Everybody's going to rush into it. So what is it that your kind of process is for that person to learn?
Okay, so you're confident jumping out wide. You're confident jumping at the wake. Those are the two things. So I would say, I mean, if you can clear the wake, on just a straight jump, then you've got confidence to kind of approach an invert at the wake. First invert usually is out wide. It's usually an air gainer. And the nice thing about those is you can take your standard, good air jump practice, arms out straight, boat pulls you back parallel. That's your cue to dip and go. So you do some jumps like that. And then when you're ready to do that invert, you cut out. And then instead of, jumping, you actually drop the rope or dip, drop the rope, and then grab the underside of both thighs with your hands. And then it's pretty much just like a backflip on a trampoline. So you're thinking about you're taking off and then you're looking over and pulling your feet around to follow you. It's not you're putting your head on the water behind you and then yanking your feet out, because then you go this high and spin really fast.
Right. So the idea of you have to get out of the water before you go. There's this kind of feeling that you get when you're riding this thing that you think that you know what pop is, even if you're doing the air jumps. But when you do your first invert, it's been a lot of years since you've done your first invert. It's only been 3 or 4 for me now. And I'll never forget the feeling of all of a sudden you just didn't jump. I mean, you go right back to square one. Okay, we're trying to flip, right? And you kind of whip around, and it takes a little while to separate that feeling of launch, flip. It's not an easy thing for most people. I don't feel like right away to feel that pop, the pop off the wake, if you will.
Sure. And so to break that down a little bit, I mean, here's an easy way to think about it. When you do, and I'm see if I can get my hands in the shot here for this.
Yeah.
So when you do a jump, I mean, you're jumping here. So, and your seat tower is always gonna be perpendicular to your board.
Sure.
So if your shoulders are in front of that seat tower, that's going to cause everything to pitch back over level. If you jump and your shoulders are behind that seat tower, that's going to make it want to pitch up and invert. So there's your difference. I mean, if you're jumping and you're putting your shoulders all the way back here, you're pulling into an invert so hard you get no jump.
Right.
So it's really a steep jump with your shoulders a little behind the seat tower. And at that point, once you clear the water, then you're looking over backwards and following around with your feet.
And then you're not worried about, in this mechanism, rope's gone, we're not worrying about anything. If you've landed back on the ski, when do you take that transition into trying to keep the rope in your hands?
When you can come around, so let me back up and add one other point in here. So most of the time when people are confident jumping just about on any ski, they're riding somewhere between, I'd say 22 to 24 miles an hour. For your first invert especially, I would suggest dropping the boat speed down. Just, dropping the boat speed down a little bit, just takes some of the over rotation factor out of it or some of the hard falls out of it.
Be specific. What speed?
So I learned to front flip at 16 miles an hour.
Oh, nice. I was doing them at 23 and tried to break my neck.
Yeah. So, and we'll talk later about front flips.
Yeah,
that's another big question they get all the time, and I think we can spend a good amount of time just kind of breaking that trick down and how to do that properly and how to approach it safely.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So, but for the first invert, I mean, somewhere around 18 miles an hour is going to give you plenty of time, and if you don't make the full rotation, that's okay, because what you'll figure out after you throw the first one, it's like, oh, actually, that wasn't so bad. Even if you land upside down on your head or if you lawn dart in a bit, the worst that you can do on learning an invert is to catch the nose of the ski and kind of get torqued back forward.
Oh, yeah, the scorpion underwater, it's magical. I mean, you get all the magic stuff that no one gets to see underwater with that one, yeah.
Yeah, and see, and those are the falls why I'm saying that make sure you've got, that you've got trusted ankle straps, because that's the one that will kind of pull you out of the belt a little bit.
Well, when you're doing that flip, the one thing that I always struggled with in the very beginning was I kind of followed the same process, and I would think a lot of people do. You kind of get the boat speed going. I'm good at this air jumping thing. Let me get up around 23, 24. I'm getting some good air. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, now you're looking at other guys, and you're like, 85-foot rope. Oh, that's how you go bigger. Okay, so now I'm on this 85-foot rope. I'm on an 84-foot or 80-foot rope, and I'm going 24 miles an hour. These air jumps look good. So when you get to this point and you're going to go 18 to do your first invert, are you shortening the rope back up? Should you ride around a little while, like a couple days at that speed? Or you're saying same length rope, drop it to 18, go do your flip?
Same for me, the way that I teach, and again, everybody's got different styles. Same length rope, drop speed, go for it. Go out and my approach to it would be, if you're ready to do a dismount gainer, go out, take 3 air jumps. Make sure you're consistent, and then on the 4th one, you cut out, dip, and then drop the rope, grab the underside of your legs, and then as you're coming out, after you leave the water, that's where you're looking over backwards, and what you're looking for is the horizon back in front of you.
Well, if anybody was like me that's listening to this, I'm going to ask in a different way, maybe more specifically. Okay. So when I would run out and I would do an air jump, I would have some pretty decent ones. Like, I'm like, oh man, I'm up here, right? When it gets to the point at which you can do something like that and you go 18, the water feels like molasses, right? It feels as though it's very heavy. You can't move near as quick. I have to know that when you are getting to the point to flip, are you trying to load the line the same amount that you would have at that higher speed when you're doing this? Or are you saying, hey, you just crawl out there nice and easy and you flip it? Like, what does your approach look like for someone that can kind of run around a little bit and get some decent air, and you're telling them to slow it down? They're going to feel like they've got chains attached to the ski. So what does that feel like at that moment? You know what I mean?
So I hear you, and that's a lot of people will say, okay, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to learn it at the speed that I ride regularly because it feels more comfortable.
Yeah.
So, and kudos to you. I mean, if that's the way you want to learn, great. But there, take 50% of your cut. You know, just take some of the power out of it so that you don't go so high. Because you, like most people, I bet, you railed out there at 23 and went to throw your first gainer, and you probably landed on the flat of your back after you did
Oh,
one
I
and a
got
half.
crushed like nobody's
Yeah,
business. I mean, I had a highlight reel of death and destruction that
yeah.
probably everyone has done themselves. But I'm not actually disagreeing with you.
So
I'm more kind of trying to get the feel of it because if I attempt another type of a trick, I'm riding 25, 26 right now on an 85-foot, 90-foot line. Are you really just going out there in molasses? Is that the feel? Like you just cutting out there in molasses and and you're just getting around? Like that is the feeling that you should feel, right? That's what you're going for?
well, so let's talk about a front flip. Have you thrown front flips?
Many, many, many painful crashes.
Yeah.
Many, many painful crashes.
Now, you want to learn how to properly throw a front flip. You drop that boat speed way down and you learn how to take off as steep as possible. And then after it comes out of the water, how to snap forward. And at 16 miles an hour, you can get that to come around.
What length rope?
That was, oh man, I learned a front flip and that was 95. So that was probably about a 75 foot rope
Okay, well, because
at
I'm
60 miles an hour. So
yeah. I think I even went more extreme because I hated not having a line. I had to have a line. I loved having a line. I like to ride 25 nearly out of the gates. I just like to have a heavy line. I'm used to slalom skiing. So I actually shortened the rope down to like 60 feet going 20 miles an hour, 21 miles an hour. And it was a heavy line. I could shoot it straight up and I could roll around. I just kind of couldn't get the end of it right ever. And it was always either a slide over rotation or I was a little bit short, bouncing my head off my chest. You know, there was always those types of things that I don't know if I'll be even trying a front flip. I mean, my arm was numb for nearly like 2 months. I kind of had a huge pinch in my neck and it was all jacked up.
see, and heavy line is less forgiving. So that's why it means slow the boat speed down, take some off of your cut. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that applies to a lot of things, not just learning tricks, but also progressing and getting your technique dialed in. So, again, there's no wrong answer.
I'm all on board with your 18 though. I've accepted a lot of abuse and I'm just kind of trying to actually get the feeling or the idea of, you know, if you go out there and you're used to that kind of a line, you're suggesting you're not going to have that kind of line to learn your flip off of your huge wake jumps maybe you're doing. You're going to feel a little bit sluggish. So that's what you're suggesting, correct?
Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that forces you to work to think about the technique and apply the technique, especially with the arms out. Yeah. So we've talked through, and so one of the things you'll hear me go back to quite a bit as we have these conversations, Trevor, is, you know, my big thing when I'm coaching is, you know, 3 things to remember, because you give somebody 15 things to remember and they're going to go out there and they're going to forget 15 things.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you say A, B, and C, they'll probably remember A and B. And then the next time they'll probably remember B and C. So there's this kind of triangle of things they're working on, and that triangle tends to get smaller if you've got 3 things to think about. If it's 15 points, it's hard to get all those to kind of come together.
Sure.
So let's break down this first invert, and then we'll move over and we'll talk about the Wakeroll a bit.
Yeah.
So at a slower boat speed, you can take your same cut. So what you're looking for is that transition point when the line load goes away and the boat pulls you back parallel. That's step 1. Smooth cut, arms out, boat pulls you parallel. Dip and go. So that's, you don't hesitate. If you wait too long, you'll feel the ski start to rise. And at that point, you've got to overcome that, bring it down, and take off.
Hands to the hip, hands to the knees, hands where you put in your hands.
That's point number 2. So point 1, smooth cut out, wait till the boat pulls you parallel, dip and go, don't hesitate. Now, as you take off, your hands are going to be at your inside hip. Now, a mistake that a lot of people make, and this comes back to the line tension thing, is people are pulling their arms in to try and pull their way into the flip. Learn to jump with both hands out. So you can have both hands out and have them close to your hip. I mean, watch pro wakeboarders, watch just about anybody who's proficient at, jumping in wake sports. Their arms are always out. So arms are out, and as you're in the air, your hands are, as you take off, you're going to let go of your outside hand. Your inside hand is going to stay close to your inside hip. Now, you're not pulling the handle down, and this is hard to do when I'm sitting in a chair, even though
Sure,
I do all
sure.
this stuff sitting in a chair.
I'll look.
But
I'll put up some clips, and we'll
yeah,
be able to see some hands. So
but
don't worry about that.
as you start coming out of the water, it's more that your hips come up to your hand, and then your hand stays there to rotate. So smooth cut out. Don't wait for the rope. Don't wait for, as the boat pulls you parallel, you dip and go. As you're coming up, that hand's going to stay at the inside, and you're going to just shoulders back just behind the seat tower. So that's going to force the invert, but it's also going to let you jump nice and high. So let me boil that down. Point number 2. So point number 2, as you're taking off, you're going to drop your outside hand. Inside hand is going to be at your hips, and you're going to throw straight back. Point number 3 is you stay tucked, so lift with your knees, follow through, and look for the horizon to come back around. So when you see that horizon, you're keeping your eyes focused on that. And what that does is that slows your rotation down so that you don't just keep spinning whenever the foil comes back in the water.
It's a really odd feeling too. When you're doing your first invert, that thing that you're doing, your chest is still forward. It's one of the craziest feelings you'll ever have. And to stress the point more, it is literally that. I mean, it's
Yep.
not much more. Like the feeling that you have when it's new is, okay, I'm in the air. I need some shoulders doing something. And that is literally, that's not it.
Correct.
Yeah, it's to your point. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. I remember watching a lot of guys, when we were trying to teach them new flips, or even myself, it just never felt right to like hit it. And then that's it, really? No, yeah, that's it.
Yep. Yeah, and it's technique. So some things to look for there, and because ultimately, if you can start spotting yourself, then you're going to progress quicker. So easy things to look for is if you're landing spinning to the outside, you're either letting your arm come up high, or you're taking off with too much load, or you're waiting too long and then you're taking off and the rope's popping, which is going to spin you.
So when you get upside down, are you telling people when they're upside down that you need to really keep your hand by your hip, like focus on that? Because sometimes you get really lost. I mean, it's like you don't even know where you're at all. But if you could focus on one thing when you're upside down, staying a little bit small and keeping your hand, is that what you kind of feel to be a successful tip?
Yes. Because if you always, for the gainer, for one hand on, you're rotating around that handle.
Right.
So if your handle is out wide at your shoulder, you're going to have kind of an off axis rotation. If that handle is nice and tight, now arm out straight, down by my hip, then you're going to rotate straight around that point and not get pulled out to the side.
So keep it down even though you're upside down and don't know where you're at. If you can focus on that hand, it'll keep you on axis.
Correct. And then as you're coming around, look for that horizon in front of you. And whenever you see that, just focus on that point, and that keeps you from over rotating.
Nice. And then how do you finish the trick? I know sometimes when you get good and you've been doing it a lot, you just land because you land. But, whenever, I don't know how fresh that is in your mind of that feeling of if you've never landed it, like what is the end game? Where do your hands go to ride away? What is the last leg of the tip?
So as the foil's hitting the water, now if you've got your eyes on the horizon, on the gainer, that foil is going to come back around and it should, hit the water pretty much level. And at that point, if you've got, that handle at your inside hip, as you're coming around, that handle is going to be starting to drift back up as you're, dropping into the water. So the handle's right in front of you, and all you have to do is just re-grab. Now,
do you,
don't want to do is, if your hand's out here a bit, if you really try and reach over and re-grab, then that's going to pitch you off axis as well. So handle stays in close. All you have to do is reach up.
Right in your lap, right. Yeah.
Yep.
That seems easy enough, but now after you land your first one, right, you've got many attempts. You've got too many attempts. We've got a guy out here that's been riding for a lot of years. Kevin, got a name drop. He's been doing these air rolls forever, and once you get in that habit of just doing something you're used to, the wake is terrifying. So what do you do to take someone that's landed 300 air rolls? How do you learn to do it at the wake now?
Okay. So good question. So, and this is, slight, tangent here. So the motion for a gainer, for an air roll, wake roll, and front rolls is all the same. The only difference is the handle position. So if you can see, okay, here, hopefully, A gainer, you cut out, you dip, you take off, that handle stays here. For an air roll, you're cutting out both hands on, and then you're just going straight back. So it's the same thing, gainer, back roll. Just having this other hand on is going to cause your body to torque. So you're still throwing straight back. For a front roll, you'll be drifting into the wake, and then all you're doing is you're just shifting your hands over in front of you. I'm not pulling in, I'm not yanking across, I'm not throwing my knees. All I'm doing is I'm shifting my handle, and then I'm throwing straight back. And that's enough to get it to pitch over.
You make a really, really good point. I'm actually guilty of this. I've been doing a slight torquey style flip, and I'm trying to get into the 50s here. So I'm starting to critique how I do these things, and that is what I've been getting tips on. Is you're doing this, you're not doing this, and as I've done them, it's kind of an odd feeling, because once you do it straight back, you're like, well, why was I doing? You know what I mean? Because basically, for anyone that's not done a roll before, when you're racing out to the side of the boat or a wake roll of any kind, it's going to kind of pull you to the side unless you fight against that. So once it buckles your body, you can basically do a flip by torquing like that, or you can do one that's much more line loaded, that's straight back, to your point.
Yep. And this is kind of how you approach that wake roll. So if you got your air rolls pretty much dialed, or even if you don't, if you've got a gainer down, because again, most people learn gainers first out wide. Now, if you feel more comfortable approaching the wake and throwing a wake roll, again, it's the same thing, but you've got, both hands on. So my tips for you there would be start wide, start as wide as you possibly can go comfortably. And you camp out there. So you cut, camp out there, wait. And then when that rope starts to pull you back in towards the boat, that's your cue to start going at the wake. Now, starting wide doesn't mean cutting crazy. So you can start way out wide and you can just glide in as slow as you want to the wake.
Right.
So the more you cut, the more line you're going to generate. But the key to the wake roll is you do not come off your edge. So we had somebody just come out and join us for a set here in Austin last week. And, his buddies have been telling him to take your wake roll bigger. You need to cut harder. So he was really, really railing in, and he was pulling on his arms and kind of, throwing himself into it and just destroying himself. So it's like, do me one favor, go out there, start twice as wide, cut half as hard, leave your arms out, and just act like you're doing a double wake cut. And first one awkward, second one starts to make sense. And then by the end of the session, he was throwing his biggest wake rolls ever, and with considerably more control.
And that was just simply staying on your cut with much less speed, getting the timing right. That's where all that came from.
Right. So we didn't adjust the boat speed. The only thing we did is, half the cut towards the wake, leaving the arms out and throwing straight back. Because if you come in really, really crazy and you get scared, most people will kind of, turn towards, the boat just to take some of that line load off, which puts slack in the line, makes you throw it over sideways, and also kills your travel.
So what does that transition to make it even more extreme? If you want to get more air, you've got to generate that speed, correct? I mean, you do have to have that type of cut eventually, right?
Yes. Get the technique. And then as you get more comfortable with the technique, arms out, because you'll feel it. And if you watch in videos, anybody who's really loading the line, if they're taking off with their arms in, the first thing that happens is their arms come out, which, again, causes that line to kind of pop and then come slack again. And that either kills the rotation or it takes your control out of it and you end up over rotating.
So what about the point of the board for this new rider? And this translates to everybody. When you're crawling in, I understand what you mean. You come out, you've got your slack moment. If you've cut out far enough, it's lost a little tension. I get the tension back. I turn the corner. Is there any bit of a thought process in the angle of the board? Or am I trying to come at a 45? Do I need to get perpendicular eventually? How do you know that you've got the right angle?
So start easy. Yeah, it's not a drift in, because it's going to take you, forever to kind of get back in the wake. But it's not a 45. Most people want to really have that line tight as they're coming into the wake. The line needs to be tight. It doesn't need to be really bound up. I mean, the idea is to kind of learn that technique. So I would say probably, if you're used to cutting into the wake, at a 45-degree angle, take half your normal cut. Take half your normal cut and start there and focus on leaving those arms out. And the idea was starting wide and taking a lighter cut is, if you're approaching the wake and you're still kind of on an arc, then that really does weird things to the rope dynamic. So if you start out wide and you take an easy cut, you've got a nice straight approach at the wake, which gives you a nice predictable takeoff.
Okay.
So that's really what you're going for.
So for step one, because I want to take this into going big as well, because once you can land 100, couple thousand of them, it feels like over the years, there comes that point where you're in the mid 40s and you're like, how do you get to the next thing? But for the first guy, we're out there recently with Kevin. Kevin's trying to learn these flips. And I think that probably he is like a majority of people that have thrown an air roll, another air roll. He's got the thing down. Do it at the wake, and there seems to be a part of it that confidence is lacking just because the wake's a little scary. But if he cuts out all the way wide, any rider, you cut out all the way wide, you're kind of creeping in. At the moment of launch, there's pure terror in someone that's never flipped at the wake. I've talked to many people. It's scary. So what is that situation like in your body? How can you build more confidence in that moment? Where do your hands go? For someone that's done them before, it's not different, but for some reason it's different. Do you have any advice that helps that kind of a person just not get killed but still rotate? Because most of the time, you know what I mean though, most of the time they come in there and they're either too hot because they're used to doing big wake jumps, or they're too soft because they're terrified. Then they come up and they're a dead fish and they get scorched because they don't rotate. Their hands are too high, they're over on the right hip if you're coming in, they're not in the right spot. What is it that you found success helping that kind of a person get that first rotation? Because once they landed, you've landed 100,000 of them over here, so you're going to be fine. But it's just a matter of getting them around. What is your tips there?
Cut less
Cut.
Yeah, and so it goes back to the same thing, because if you're used to taking big wake jumps and things like that, you want to rail in, but like you said, first time approaching at the invert, you tense up, you get scared. So what happens is, people will come off their edge, or they'll try and pull their arms in. And when they do, it really causes it to, kind of change the rotation. And that's where that stall comes in. Because if you take off and your arms are in and the rope pops and all of a sudden it goes slack, well, that's pulled you forward and you're halfway in your invert, and then it stalls. There's nothing to finish it. Leaving those arms out lets it kind of progress naturally.
I'm finding a trend here.
Yeah.
We're talking about arms again. We're talking about not having them straight's the issue.
Line load.
It's interesting because it's kind of, you can get it in many ways. When you're doing air rolls or big air jumps, it seems as though it's easy because you've built them over a long distance. But there's something about that squirrely thing coming to the wake where, I don't know whether it's the turn back that you get a little bit of slack and then you're not quite ready, so then you're doing too much, or what is it that you do? That would be a great question. I find this happen to myself all the time, and I've talked with other guys. What is it about that moment when you are all the way cut out as far as you can? Say you're, a pretty decent rider. You've done some big stuff. You've terrified. You've crapped your pants. You've done all the things. You've got scorched. The thing that I find most of a struggle right now is when you get out to the corners and you want to come back. And you may have already answered this kind of sort of from what I'm gathering with line tension. If I come back and I'm trying to get more speed, I feel as though I'm so inconsistent with having my line right by the time I need to be jumping. So for that person that's new or an advanced, is it literally just the answer is the slower progression? Just cut in there slower so that you have it right? Or how do you make sure you get the line tension on your way back right out of the gate?
So, and it's not right out of the gate. So you kind of hit a couple of the key points as you were talking through that. Step one, cut wide. The wider you start, the more setup time you have coming into the wake, and that takes that weird approach out of it. So if you start wide and you take kind of an easy cut, then you have plenty of time to have a straight approach at the wake, and that's where that line stops doing all of this, and it's just nice and steady, which makes it a lot more approachable and makes it a lot easier to keep the arms out. Taking some off of your cut makes it not so scary to approach it. And so start wide, arms are out, easy cut in. Once you get that takeoff and you start feeling that rotation smooth out, as you get more comfortable, then you can cut more and more and more and start putting more power into it. And that's where you're really going to start kicking them up. But again, with great power comes great responsibility. It's a lot less forgiving. So,
put your football helmet on. You signing up for this one.
Yeah. Get in there, Timmy. Let's go.
Yeah, let me ask you one more specific feeling. So think about when you cut out all the way. You cut back so extremely hard, okay? If you are trying to get into these higher frame counts and you're trying to actually get the most amount of pop possible, when you initiate the cut back, do you already feel a loaded line, or do you find it on the way to the wake?
So they're in different styles. Some people do what they call the progressive load, where it starts easy and then it builds. Especially true in wakeboarding.
Sure.
Hydrofoiling, we're riding longer lines. We're out wider than most wakeboarders approach. So most of us, most of the higher end riders, myself included, have kind of more of a snappier take at the wake. But if you watch, most of us, we cut out there really hard and we're waiting for that line to start coming back. We're not turning back in immediately with a slack line.
Right.
Because then you've got to kind of wait and overcome that and let things stabilize. So if you just kind of camp out there, or another tip, if you want to come back in quicker, bounce the board off the water, bleed off a little bit of speed just to get that tension back in before you cut back in at the wake.
So before you aggressively, or before you cut back your style, you have a rope in your hands. It's not Jello. You're not catching it on the way in. When you initiate, you've got pull. You've already got a loaded line when you initiate. Is that correct?
Ideally, yes. I'm not going to say 100% of the time, because
no, just what you're shooting for.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
it's moving you forward again. The boat is pulling you again. You're waiting until that moment to cut back. Is that correct?
Correct. So yeah, I'm not turning. It's kind of like slalom skiing. You don't want to you don't want to force the turn, right? You're letting the boat kind of initiate the turn back in. That way you are approaching with a steady line.
Yeah, and I only ask that like that because it kind of feels almost as when you're just most people that are into this sport, I feel like, watch videos and try to mimic and try to learn the best they can. But there's some of those little pieces of it that it's kind of a little bit of a disconnect. If I'm cutting back, am I cutting back without the rope, or do I got to wait for the rope here? Because most of the time you cut back so hard that if I try to do that, I can do that without a ton of line, but it's a little trickier if you already have the line. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like you pass the line and then it yanks you. And I'm like, is that what you're doing? And then, hearing you talk about it, that's not what you're doing at all. You know what I mean?
No, but time, experience. You start to know, like, okay, I'm, cut out, glide. The ski's rising a bit. As soon as that ski kind of starts to level off, I know the line's coming back. And at that point is whenever I turn and go. So
interesting.
More fine detail.
Yeah.
The more you ride a foil, and this is true with foils in general. Be it sit foils, surf foils, whatever, is once you learn to kind of anticipate a foil, that's when you really start connecting with it. Because if you're waiting for the foil to do something, if you're reacting once a foil rises, you're too late. You have to know, like, okay, as the foil's rising, I'm already kind of getting on top of it and telling it to stay down, or as the rope's starting to come back, I'm already setting up my turn to go back in so that, I've got, optimal timing there.
Sure. So since we're on big back rolls, the flip backwards, I feel like that's a tip that probably should be pointed out again, because the squirreliness of the roll, it's kind of easy if you don't really understand what you're doing. You kind of forget that you're going backwards. And, I don't know. Have you seen that much with people you're coaching and things? They get a little twisty thing going on at the wake because they're already kind of used to that, right?
Yeah, and what that does is, if your shoulders are over here and you're not in line with the ski, you're putting power elsewhere. Yeah. So optimal power transfer is you're centered over the ski, your arms are out, and that puts all that power down in the foil, and that's where you get that big, powerful takeoff.
So the one scary moment, right, that these people that are trying to transition to the wake, or even if you're more advanced, when you hit the wake, do you feel as though your ski is angled at a 45, or do you feel like you're not technically perpendicular to the boat, but where is the proper launch angle? If you're new, it's more towards the boat, right? And if you're advanced, are you literally perpendicular to the boat when you're trying to launch?
At that point, you're going more off a line load than you, or me. I'm going more off a line load than I am angle at the wake. Because I'm coming in pretty much as hard as I can. The other thing you'll see is, the more angle you come in with, you're also leveraging against the boat, so you've already got a lot more bind in that rope.
Okay, yeah. So Let's try to say if you're a 45, 46 person. I actually have not yet been able to go to many fly-ins at all. I was lucky enough to, they kind of hosted one in Kansas City last year, and I got the vibe for it. I stalked this whole community. I really do enjoy it. I want to go to a bunch of them, but I got 2 young kids. Kind of can't really do that right now. But I feel like there's a lot of riders that are kind of in that window of like a 38 to 45. They're pretty good air, but that moment of like, how do you actually transition? What gets you into these bigger air stuff? Is it all boat speed? Is it all line length? Is it, what truly is that big jump that you get maximal potential out of your setup?
Refining your technique. So step 1, arms out. We talked about that, quite a bit here, so that you get that proper line load. The other one is getting your timing down, especially like for wake rolls. Like if you're dipping too late, if your foil is exiting halfway through the wake, you're missing a lot of the jump. And learning to take off steep. So really improving your technique on your dip. So learning to push your feet, and it's again hard to kind of see in the chair, is like for a dip, you're kind of lunging forward and pushing the ski down. And what that does is it gets the ski going down, and it also allows you to get your shoulders back behind the ski. So when it changes direction, it does so really abruptly. Then you can yank up on your knees and get a good steep angle out of the water.
Is that feeling for you during a back roll very similar to like an air gainer? Because I've felt it many times on like if you're out there ripping and you do a gainer, you really have to use your legs to make the ski move. Are you doing a similar type of thing even at the wake, that same sensation of feet go down and you're making the whole ski pop like that?
Oh, yeah.
So it's pretty much, this thing is more or less, you're doing backflips on every trick. The handle is what makes it do something different.
Yeah,
and
again, so seriously, so it's not that you should never have an offside, right? So let's just say that
talk to this right hand, I'll tell you I got an offside.
I'll leave the jokes on the table there. Yeah. It's like there's plenty. That was a softball.
I don't even know why it's attached to my body, to be honest. It doesn't like anything.
So but so I'll demonstrate my right hand. So if I'm cutting out to throw a gainer on the left side of the boat, I'm going to cut out, I'm going to dip, drop my left hand, and throw straight back. My right hand is by my right hip. Now, if I wanted to go out and throw an air roll, or if I want to throw a wake roll, I'm cutting, my arms are, my left arm is straight facing towards the boat, and then I'm going to dip and I'm going to throw straight back. So same motion, gainer's facing here, one hand on, back roll's facing here, 2 hands on. As you take off, that torque is naturally going to twist you. Now for a front roll, let's say that I'm coming into the wake and I want to throw a front roll. I'm approaching, with my hands kind of above my right knee. And then before I take off, all I'm going to do is just pull my hands, over my left knee and then throw straight back. And that's enough just to change the angle of it, that it's going to rotate over.
Now, I will tell you, you can do a front wheel, like a sideways cartwheel, as long as you really yank on the rope.
Great technique. So the other way to learn it is, and the way that we actually teach people the front roll, is just start 5 foot outside the trough of the wake. Drift in. Just so the more you cut, the more you have to move that rope. So for that, start 5 foot outside the trough of the wake. And again, we're talking about, going towards the left of the boat. So I'm out, 5 foot outside the right wake, and then just kind of drift in. And then I'm just going to throw a gainer straight back. I'm not yanking anything. I'm just kind of drifting in and then throwing straight back. And that will get you to just kind of flip over and land inside the wake.
Really?
Yep.
I have yet to feel that. I've probably done 100 front rolls, but they're like extremely violent.
And you try cutting in, don't you? And then
I come at it. Yeah, I'm coming at it. I don't think
what you do is you throw your knees to the outside so that you miss that rope, and then you take all the rope tension out of it, and free spinning in the air, and then you over rotate and smack yourself either on this side or that side.
Well, I've been fortunate enough to not get crushed, but that's I'm gonna have to mess with that, because that's really interesting. I didn't really realize that it's literally a linear backflip with the hands. I kind of thought there was more stuff going on to make that happen.
No, so just again, approach it small. Don't start, for this one, you don't start way out wide, because you want to really just kind of drift in, and all you're trying to do is just throw straight back and go from the outside of the wake to the inside of the wake.
Interesting. You're making it sound too simple, Al. You're really making it sound too simple. Backflips. That's it.
Yeah, it's gainers, back rolls, front rolls, all the same thing.
So a
And
back roll or any of these things at the wake, if you're not getting those types of frames, what boat speeds do you have to go? You see these questions all the time. Just put it out there. If you're trying to get in the 50s, what's the minimum that you're going? And I mean like realistically getting there. Not the most perfect, bestest form you've ever seen in your life, but pretty good. What kind of line length would you suggest this is going to get it done?
line length alone, um, I mean, there's so many variables that go into
Sure,
this. I
sure.
mean,
I understand.
even what seat tower are you on, what board are you on? Because if you're on one of the older, like just uniform layup boards, I mean, it's going to be a little bit spongier, which is going to take a little bit out, and plus
Yeah,
they're
good point.
heavier. So I mean,
Yeah, good point.
if you're riding a shock tower, that's gonna take some out of there because they compress on takeoff. I mean, you actually get more compression on takeoff than you do on landings most of the time. So
Interesting.
yeah,
So say you've got a newer setup somewhere in the last 5, 6, 8 years, an LE38 or better. You know what I mean? So generally speaking, not too complicated. I'm just saying like, you probably you're saying 80, 85 foot line will get it done.
yeah,
You probably want to be, what boat speed would you suggest?
I'd say most people, who are really trying to kind of, push their frame counts higher are somewhere between, 23 and a half to 26. With the bigger wings, we started to slow down, back in the good old days, the original LEs, maximum speed you could call in tournament was 30 and everybody rode 30.
Really?
Yeah.
I did that. I have to say, I saw Brett Speed ride really fast trying to do a double front flip. I don't remember for sure if it was 30, but I think it might have been. There's not a moment in my body where I want to go 30 miles an hour on a ski. I mean, it's terrifying. I don't even like to ride my boat at 30 miles an hour, let alone be on a ski. That would be crazy. Have you done some of those at 30 miles an hour? I'm sure you were in the mix, right?
Oh yeah. Back in the day, I mean, we rode at 30 all the time. So, but those were much smaller wings. So, higher speed gives you more pop. So
Right.
now, I mean, my usual call speed is, 25.5. Yeah. And if we're going out and we're going to do big air and I want to go, punch out just, a huge nasty front, then, I'll call 26.5 or something like that.
But most of that is still just all the rules apply. You've got to have your arms right. Just speeding up the boat's not going to do it. You've got to carry all those principles forward. It's not just speed up the boat and you're just magically going to get 50-something frames.
Yeah. So I would say, I mean, if you're a mid-40s rider on average, if your average roll, let's just say wake roll, because I mean, that's an easy judge kind of, across the board. If your average wake roll is mid-40s, dialing in your technique will probably get you another 5 to 6 frames easy. Without changing boat speed, line length, setup, anything.
Yeah, it's a tricky business, that whole line load thing. The straight arms, the craziest thing about that is it doesn't matter who you watch ride. The odd thing about it is you watch someone that's really good and then you watch their arms and there's so much correction that's happening upside down. You know what I mean? So you think about someone that's never done a flip before, and then you're like, well, I saw their arm move outside. Well, it's because they were trying to slow it down because they way over rotated. But you know what I mean? You see all these fundamental principles that people that are really, really good at it, it doesn't always translate always back to the fundamentals. So it's pretty cool to hear you kind of break it down in a way that's like, no, this is what you're trying to do. It's very simple, very linear. Back rolls, let the rope change you. You know what I mean? The rope's going to do that.
Yeah, and if you do have a tight line, it gives you that opportunity to correct. I mean, if your line is slack in the air, then sorry, Charlie. I mean, you're at the mercy of how you took off. You're at the mercy of, which direction you're headed. At best, you can kind of open up and slow your moment down, or you can tuck to get it to spin a little faster. You can't change direction if you've got a slack line.
Right. One thing that I find very challenging for myself personally is the idea of bringing your hips to the rope in a sense, rather than, oh yeah, I can get him there. Yeah, watch this. You know what I mean?
See what you did with your arms there.
That's what I mean. I can get it there. And it's kind of funny because the more I've kind of here and there had one or two and then listening to you talk about it, that's where most all of the bigger stuff is you have to learn how to keep the rope, which is, it's very technical. It's not as easy as it seems. You know what I mean?
Yeah, especially if you're used to throwing big stuff by kind of yanking. And it's like, well, I can get mid-40s by, cutting hard and then yanking my arms in. For me to tell you, okay, now go out there and take half that cut and leave your arms out.
And it give you the same result, or if not better.
Yeah. So, and then, so smoother and as high, if not higher. And then once you get that, then, okay, now go back to your regular cut and see how that feels.
Do you have
Yeah.
any triggers at which I've heard this line before where it's something about kiss the bubbles or whatever. Is there anything that you utilize to set up your timing to hit the wake just right? Something that you use on your approach?
So I think the best advice that I was given, like, because once you ride a while, you kind of just you start to understand that timing. But if you really want to squeeze every ounce or every frame you possibly can out of your setup, I think it was Ben Fernie that told me this. He said, dip half a second earlier than you think you need to. Yeah, and
I
obviously, I
think I
mean,
need 3.
so yeah, and the key obviously is, I mean, you want to get as low on the foil as possible so that you get that full ramp up, but you don't want to slap that board on the water because then it's just bleeding energy off.
Right.
Yeah, and you certainly don't want to hit, punch the wake with the board because that takes all the energy out of it. It also changes your direction.
Yeah. Then you get crushed. Yeah. I
Yeah.
got one of those last week. It was quite lovely.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, just cut at it harder, and it's just that didn't work so good. Got the old relaunchy flip thing. You want those in
Uh-huh.
slow mo. Those are the good ones. What's the worst? You mentioned the craziest line wrap up. What's the craziest wreck you've ever had?
Um, there's been a lot.
I I saw a video of you a couple. I don't know when I saw it. It's been a while, but you had some insane KGB that was extremely high. You kind of lost it a little bit somewhere, and your board snapped in half. I don't know if you've seen that video anytime
Oh
recently,
yeah.
but it was probably a long time
Uh,
ago. But
I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, how did that feel? Was it miserable? Was it a terrible impact, or did you get lucky?
It's scarier than anything. So,
Yeah,
because I mean, I've had a lot of boards breaking, and anybody who's done this a while, I mean, boards break, nothing lasts forever. I mean, you don't make a Formula One car to go. I mean, if you're driving something that hard, if you're riding something that hard, it's going to break, so it's just something to kind of expect. And if it's something you're really, really worried about, then preemptively change your gear out, which is what a lot of us, higher end riders do. Um, but that board fortunately stayed together. So my biggest fear is, whenever, because they usually break on takeoff. That one broke on landing and immediately just kind of recoiled me back into the air into that, crazy uncontrolled backflip.
right.
So I'm pretty sure if you look at that video in detail, you'll see what I do is I take my arms and put them underneath my legs in case that board completely snapped. So it would hit my arms rather than anything soft under my legs. So
Yeah.
it's just air awareness. I mean, you do this long enough and you especially when things are going absolutely wrong, know where you are, know how to fall. So
What's the tip? What's your go-to? I
so
have a fetal position that I've been utilizing.
yes. So
Yeah.
let's see your fetal position. You go first.
Well, I tell you, I actually think I need to adjust it, but I just hold my head like this and I try to get in a bit of a ball, but sometimes I land so much upside down that I feel like I'm ripping my own head off. So I'm thinking that I need to bring it upright a little bit more, but I don't know for sure. I
No,
try not to test it much.
grab the back of your head and pull your chin in, and that keeps you from ragdolling. So
So you do
just
want to just pull the chin down.
yeah.
Okay. Because I've done that a couple times, but that was my injury. My injury was hardcore whiplash. So when I've landed kind of upside down again in that scenario, I'm like, do I really want to be pulling this puppy down? You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, I'll take your advice. I've seen some of your crashes. It looks rather.
So especially if you know you're gonna, and after a while, you kind of get to know it's like, oh, I have no idea where I am at this point. So look for the horizon, and that way you can at least kind of gauge which direction you're going. Because if you know you're going to go sideways, and that's when you're really kind of pulling in to keep your head from whiplashing to the side.
Have you had any crazy neck stuff that made you start doing that?
Um, well, just time on seat. I mean,
Sure, sure,
eventually
sure.
something happens. But I think probably one of the craziest falls I had was in a tournament. Yeah, and I was full rail cutting out to throw a big air KGB, and then I came out the second wake and just disappeared. Just gone immediately. Just ski glitched, went in the water, and hit my hand on the tower, or so I thought. And came back up, and they're like, "Are you all right?" It's like, "Oh, yeah," shook that one off, and it's like, "Yeah, my hand hurts." Yeah, I must have hit it on the tower. It's like, all right, let's keep going. So pick back up and ride and make it down the course. And it's like, all right, let me get that KGB in now. So I go out and throw a big air KGB, and I landed with just this hand on, and I actually felt the metacarpal separate. It's like, oh,
Oh, you really jacked something up.
Yeah. So it turned out that on that fall, just going out the second wake and just scorpion and just immediately that, I found Nemo on that one.
Oh
And
yeah.
just the force of it, pulled my finger up and pushed it back in the metacarpal and fractured it. And I
Jeez.
kept riding and it separated. Fortunately, that one was a straight break and no surgery. So
It's
that was,
crazy.
yeah, not in the middle of a KGB or, crashing on KGB, but just doing a double weight cut.
Oh yeah, I mean, to be honest, I almost think that those are the worst. I tried to get into riding faster. I was a big slalom skier and riding on two skis and jumping the wake all the time. That was kind of like how I grew up and what I was really into. And I wanted to go fast because the feeling of flying is just unbelievable on this thing. When you first get that first air on one of these chairs, it's the craziest feeling ever. And I just love to rip back and forth. And I remember multiple times wasn't great at doing elevation. I mean, wings peak just buried Scorpion. It's so terrible. And not quite that, but in your eyelids and you can't breathe out your nose for 6 months. I mean, there's some real ramifications or some things you got to deal with one of those.
Yep. Yeah. So learning tricks progressively and slowly. I mean, it's the tricks that's when you're expecting it. That's when to kind of cover up. It's those unexpected ones whenever you just really get smoked.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of the or wake jumps. I had a big run-in with wake jumps too. When you would, I was told one time to look at the horizon when you did a wake jump because it helped you kind of quit falling forward. That helped me a ton. I got on someone's ski one time that was super hot. Came in there thinking I was gonna just ride like I always rode. Hit this thing. I think I did like a full nose dive. My pinky freaking touched the back of my wrist and jacked it all up. And
Oh wow.
I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff you could do on these things,
Yeah. Anytime you're on a new rig, I mean, shave off a mile an hour or two, or just back off 50% of your cut, feel it out first.
Yeah.
So
Do you have a go-to with that? Like if you got on a new ski, do you have like a little routine you do, or that's just your advice? Slow it down a little bit, get a feel for it first.
air jumps, double weight cuts, air jumps, make sure the ski's stable, just kind of feel it out. And then, 50%, go into a back roll, just feel it out. And then once you're comfortable, then whale on it.
Right. No, I mean, I get it. It's getting on a new rig. Sometimes you think it's going to be, everything's going to be better. If it's a better ski, it's got bigger wings, things are going to happen. I wanted to ask you, when you rode 30 miles an hour on small wings, right? And you get your air, does the feeling or the sensation, is it exactly the same as getting a newer, higher end ski and then riding at 25? I mean, air's air, right? Or is 30 miles an hour just terrifying no matter what?
It wasn't back then. Now, I mean, I get anywhere close to that, on these bigger wings, and it feels really terrifying. But,
Right,
so I think it's, air's air. Yeah.
right.
If you're on the smaller wings and, full Ricky Bobby, then, send it.
For sure, for sure. Well, I know that you have, a lot of, your front flip is one of the coolest to watch, I think. I know there's a lot of people that do different versions of it and things, but I would love to hear your take on how to learn a front flip, how to not kill myself when I attempt it maybe one day, if I decide that I have the kahunas to do it. But, I mean, your front flips are just insanely large and in charge, if you will. So
Appreciate it.
when you learn a front flip, did you learn them in the air first or at the wake, like off to the sides? What truly, what do you suggest? What do you do?
Actually, the first time I learned a front flip was with Mike Murphy after the day after the first ever Air Chair Worlds back in 1997, I believe. Small private lake in northern Colorado, and instructions I were given were, start wide, take off really steep, throw yourself at the water, and miss.
And miss.
And miss.
That's it.
That was Murphy's instructions to me on how to throw a front flip.
Wow.
But
did you go out and execute exactly that?
yeah, I did. And at 16 miles an hour, I made 3/4 of a front flip.
Oh,
On an
nice.
old school, the sky ski wasn't even around then. It was, one of the old school, like flame board air chairs. So, but progressing from that to, a 56.5 frame front flip, which is, I think, one of the highest ones I've thrown. So it's the biggest front flip right now, I think, is, somewhere between myself, Shannon Pope, and Jake Bradley. So I think we're all 56.5 frames. But that transition from learning the front to throwing them, to the moon as high as you can, that's it's kind of a longer discussion. So I tell you what, why don't we'll set another one of these up and we'll talk through getting a front flip going. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We can go into front flips and some of these other tricks too. I'm sure a lot of people would love to know how to do some of these advanced level tricks. So we get into a couple more of them. You got any? I know you got an awesome thing going down there in Austin with lessons and things like that. Do you want to plug any of that kind of stuff?
Sure. Yeah. Here in Austin, we've got Austin Foil Alliance going. So we are, a full service center. We can help you out with sit foil, surf foil, gear, lessons. We're even starting to dabble with wing foiling as well. So if you haven't
That's
seen
super
that,
cool.
check that out because tricks on the wing foil and the tricks on the sit foil are really starting to look similar. So I think we're going to see a lot of crossover from these guys soon.
Oh, that'd
So
be awesome.
and the whole thing that we're about at Austin Foil Alliance is, we don't care what you ride, surf, sit, brands, whatever. I mean, it's all about foils. Foils has always been something that's just so people and family and friendly centric, fun centric, that's really what we're trying to, foster here and, and keep having fun while we're doing it.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I've seen some of the lessons you guys post that clip. Just had a little lesson the other day, I guess, with a rider, and it's pretty crazy to see what you can do with a little bit of time and trying to help someone out individually. It can go a long way. So I appreciate your time tonight. I'll try to get this thing stuck together so everybody can see it, and we'll have to get together sometime soon, and we'll go through these front flips and some of these other tricks. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, check us out, Austin Foil Alliance on social media or atxfoil.com. And yeah, thanks for your time, Trevor. And I really enjoyed talking with you.
Hey, you bet. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.